When we behold the grandeur of the growing maple tree, it is easy to overlook the seed from which it sprang. Encoded in that seed is the spirit and life of the tree. It is the spirit of the seed that tells what kind of tree will grow, how deep the root, and what fruits it will bear. To know the tree, we must search for the knowledge of the spirit of the seed. This is the story of a search for the spirit of the seed of the land and people we call Ontario. We already know the name of the spirit, L'Esprit Voyageur, the spirit of the voyageur. This, then, is the story of a search for the spirit called Voyageur, L'Esprit Voyageur. Here is the spirit called Voyageur, L'Esprit Voyageur, lover of the land, jealous of the seed, careful builder, generous and bold of heart. Here is the spirit called Voyageur. Ici l'Esprit Voyageur.
Ici l'Esprit Voyageur, habitant cultivateur, artisan.
Let us invite you to share in our search for the spirit of the seeds of Ontario, a search for the spirit called Voyageur, a search for l'Esprit Voyageur. The search begins here. This is Assumption Church. On this site, in September of the year 1749, Father Pierre Poitier, a Belgian Jesuit missionary, opened a mission church known as l'Assomption de la Très Sainte Vierge Marie parmi les Hurons. It soon became a center of worship and culture for both Indian and pioneer families. It remains to this day the oldest continuous parish in the province of Ontario. Located on the Detroit River, Assumption Church stands adjacent to the University of Windsor, the present center of culture and learning. In our search for the spirit of the seed, we travel south from Assumption Church and pass villages with French names like La Salle and Rivière au Canard. About 1 kilometer before you enter historic Amherstburg, the highway suddenly comes upon this peaceful little glen on the shore of the Detroit River. Your eye is immediately attracted to the entranceway, which announces this as the Cemetery of the Wyandot Indians. This Government of Canada National Historic Site plaque is very informative. We learn that the Wyandots were an assembly of 3 different tribes which had been dispersed in a tribal war with the Iroquois during the 1640s. You experience a sense of awe and reverence as your eyes roam the gently rolling terrain. The feeling grows that we are closing in on the first key in our search. Your sense of awe deepens as you realize here is the resting place of a person of great importance. This is the burial spot of Mondoron, the last chief of the Wyandots. Born in January 1808, he lived for 72 years. Nearby is the gravesite of Alexis M. Splitlog, that great Wyandot chief who was with the renowned Tecumseh and General Brock at the surrender of Detroit to the British. And here lies the former head chief of the Wyandot Nation. Historians tell us this was Mondoron's predecessor, who helped form the Wyandot Nation during the 1640s. Just beyond this low fenced enclosure, here rests a European with a French name, César Drouillard. Who was this man? What history is entombed here?
Now buried here side by side, where dreams and heartaches collide, pains or pleasures no longer try. Life's duties now set aside.
Here is an early photograph of Césaire Drouillard, obtained from family records. This is a tintype photograph of Césaire's father, Basile Drouillard, who lived near Rivière-au-Canard during the early and middle 1800s. It would appear that Drouillard family shares great importance along with others for our search for the spirit of the seeds of pioneer Ontario. The most informative work thus far written on the subject that intrigues us is entitled The Windsor Border Region by Father Ernest J. Lajeunesse, CSB, an historian and scholar. In the foreword of this book, Leslie M. Frost wrote on May 12, 1960, and I quote, "There is only one locality in the province of Ontario that can claim a continuous settlement antedating the British conquest. That locality is the Windsor area on the Canadian side of the Detroit River." End of quote. From Father Lajeunesse's book, The Windsor Border Region, it is noted the first of the Drouillards arrived here in July of 1749. Here is recorded but one line of Drouillard from 1698 to the present day. The story begins with Jean-Baptiste Drouillard, a voyageur. That intrepid, free-thinking group of French Canadians, exploring, trading, mapping, braving the wilds to open the new continent, a life suited only to the very brave at heart. Ici L'Esprit Voyageur. As a voyageur, Jean-Baptiste Drouillard would transport much-needed supplies from Montreal-Lachine to the distant Fort de Détroit. Navigating the wild inland seas, he would return with cargoes of fur pelts, thus earning a living for his wife and family of 5 boys and 3 girls. The voyage would take about 100 days for the round trip. The voyageurs would hug the rugged northern Great Lakes shoreline. Although exhausted, they slept fitfully under canoe and canvas, always in fear and respect for the fierce Iroquois who frequented the South Shore. The voyageurs never wandered too near the Iroquois hunting ground. It was unthinkable to incur the displeasure of these savage warriors. The very names, Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk, struck fear in the hearts of the voyageurs. At last, the peaceful entrance at the mouth of the Detroit River, La Rivière de Détroit. Jean-Baptiste Drouillard kept in his heart this view of the almost treeless shoreline of La Rivière de Détroit, where La Rivière aux Danes joins it. After the fierceness of Lake Ontario and the rugged Lake Erie, this indeed was La Paradis Terrestre, an earthly paradise. The spirit was beginning to stir in the seed. Jean-Baptiste, the voyageur, often thought of his eldest son, Simon, back at home in Montreal. Simon Drouillard was destined to play an important role in the founding of the province of Ontario. However, that hot summer of 1748, Simon whiled away the days with his companions, telling them of his father's promise, "Next year, you will be old enough to share with me the great voyageur adventure." And so it was that in April of 1749, Jean-Baptiste announced to his startled family, "The plans for going to Fort de Détroit have been changed." Simon's face dropped in disappointment, and then the father further added, "But," pausing to savor the row of wide-opened eyes, "but the change in plans is that we are all going, every single one of us, to Fort Détroit, to stay, to live." Then he explained that the gouverneur of New France had appointed a military engineer, Joseph Gaspard Chosgros de Léry, to lead a convoy of canoes to transport families desiring to settle near the Fort de Détroit. And so it was that on June 6, 1749, Jean-Baptiste Drouillard, his wife, their eldest son Simon, 4 brothers and 3 sisters, joined a convoy of many canoes containing pioneer families, merchants, voyageurs, and cargoes of vine slips, fruit stones, and seeds of all kind. All departed Lachine and left their secure life behind. In the lead canot de maître rode Delery and also Jacques-Charles de Sabrevois, the newly appointed commandant for the Fort de Détroit. A canot de maître was about 40 feet long and 8 feet wide at the middle, could carry 8,000 pounds, plus a crew of 8 to 10. If we can imagine the size of these magnificent craft, longer than a city bus and almost as wide, able to carry 5 tons, yet swift and light, light enough to be carried over land on portage. The convoy followed closely the rugged north shore of Lake Ontario. In order to avoid contact with the fearsome Iroquois, who usually frequented the southern portion of the lake, nights were spent like this, many in fear and trembling, only to press on in the early dawn. Finally, on July 2nd, after an exhausting voyage, Fort Niagara is very near. We can only guess with what amazement the weary travelers greeted the approaching roar of the tremendous falls at Niagara. At last, here was the secure halfway stopover point, within earshot of the roar and within sight of the wonder of the great falls at Niagara. Simon Drillard was impressed by Delery's leadership and quietly noted that after carefully inspecting the fortifications, he ordered many repairs and changes to be carried out on the fort. After a refreshing 3-day layover, the rested convoy entered Lake Erie in the early dawn of July 5th, 1749. The Capitaine Delery continued his tactic of hugging the northern shoreline, many days paddling until the light was almost gone. But dawn always arrived too quickly, heedless of the weariness of the voyageurs and the pioneer families.
Ici l'esprit voyageur, habitant qui s'y battait, artisan et homme de cœur. Ici.
On the 24th day of July, the convoy arrived at Point Pelée, which today is one of our most beautiful national parks at the southmost tip of Canada, which is the same latitude as California in the U.S. and Madrid in Spain. Here, Delery stopped the convoy. Again, he impressed the voyageurs with his skill and wisdom. Canots which attempt to round La Pointe Pelée, he explained, are wrecked even though the wind be mild. Waves break with great force on the rocky point, which contains numerous hidden bottom-tearing rocks. We will portage here, Delery said. All will help, women and children too, to carry our cargo and canoe. We must cross through these trees for a distance of about 6 arpents, roughly about a city block. Then a marsh will appear, which becomes navigable for a considerable distance. Then another portage of about 12 arpents. Alors voilà, the west beach of Point Pelée, which means Bald Point.
At the last portage Point Pelée.